Hi, grade 4. How are you? Let's continue our discussion on the Japanese occupation and the pains of World War II. Get ready with your notebooks. The Philippine government in exile. In Bataan, General Douglas MacArthur, the supreme commander of the Allied forces, and his troops waited for reinforcements from the United States. But the destruction of aircraft carriers at Pearl Harbor made it impossible for the United States to send relief. The Japanese army moved to Bataan, making General MacArthur retreat to Corregidor with the American and Filipino soldiers. From Corregidor, General MacArthur was forced to order a retreat down the peninsula. President Manuel Quezon and Vice President Sergio Osmeña left Corregidor for the United States in a submarine. There, they formed a government in exile. In Manila, the Japanese commander-in-chief proclaimed the establishment in the Philippines of a Japanese military administration to supervise the political, economic, and cultural affairs of the Philippines. This administration was to be headed by a Director General. The Philippines were now forced to follow directives from Tokyo, the capital of Japan. The Japanese declared martial law in the country and imposed a curfew in Manila. They also issued an order to confiscate all firearms. The singing of the Philippine national anthem and the use of the Philippine flag were prohibited. Every act against the Japanese forces was punishable with death. Lastly, the use of the American dollar and the Philippine currency was also prohibited. Only Japanese notes were used for money. The government introduced to the Philippines by the Americans was completely changed by the Japanese rulers. Before the Japanese occupation, the provincial governors and city and municipal mayors had both executive and legislative duties. But the Japanese established a puppet government in the Philippines. This meant that although they had set up the Philippine Executive Commission, composed of 6 Filipino officials, all the actions of the government were controlled by the Japanese High Command, which is the group of highest-ranking Japanese military officers and political leaders in power. Several other Filipino leaders were forced to serve the puppet government. These leaders, while serving the puppet government, secretly supported the guerrilla movement, which was the group of Filipinos who were waging war against the occupying Japanese military and government. They argued fearlessly with the Japanese against taking Filipino men to fight the guerrillas and the other enemies of Japan. Unfortunately, after the war, some Filipinos unfairly referred to these officials as collaborators with the Japanese when they had agreed to obey orders from the Japanese High Command only for the sake of peace and order and the well-being of the Filipino people. Japan used propaganda to win the collaboration of the Filipino people. They used the mass media, such as newspapers, books, pamphlets, theaters, movies, and stage shows for their propaganda. For instance, in books, the pupils had to erase all dollar signs and replace these with the peso sign. They also replaced all English names with Filipino names. The Japanese language Nippongo and Japanese culture were taught to all the Filipinos, regardless of age. Nippongo classes were offered in schools and used in government offices and commercial firms. Japanese culture and language were made compulsory subjects in schools and included in their civil service examination. Classes were conducted by Japanese soldiers for Filipinos of different ages who were not in school or working in government offices or commercial firms. To complete their invasion of the country, Japanese professional musicians, scholars, scientists, poets, artists, and entertainers came to the country to impress and inspire the Filipinos with their achievements in the fields of arts, letters, and sciences. The Japanese used another agency to win the goodwill of the people. This was the Kalibapi or Kapisanan ng Paglilingkod sa Bagong Pilipinas. Can you memorize what Kalibapi means? Kalibapi was supposedly a patriotic and non-political association but was actually a political party that the Japanese allowed to exist in the country. It was supposed to serve as the Japanese main propaganda agency, but the Filipinos skillfully used it for their own good. Lastly, through the Calibapi, the Filipinos also sponsored national art exhibitions, cultural contests, provincial fairs, and projects toward improving the health of the Filipino people. Today, we learned about the Japanese occupation, its puppet government, and the several Japanese propaganda. I hope you learned something today. If ever you have questions, feel free to message me or leave a comment on the comment section below. Thank you so much, Grade 4, and God bless you.